So for this edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, I think it's safe to say we are firmly in the Legendino Tim Vickery's domain, because your domain is, well, hang on, before you start shaking your head, hold on a second. I know where you're going with that. No. Hold on. Your domain.
No. There's no lyrics. That's where I was going.
There are lyrics actually. It's no, you can't fool me anymore.
Well, I tried. I gave it everything I
did. Yeah. What's not recorded does not have to be discussed on the actual recording. But interestingly enough, I always thought that your domain was Brazil specifically, but South America in general. And at a push, even though you don't like it, at a push, Central America.
Yeah, no, I can't say Central America, but also I'm gonna push back with domain because I'm a guest here. You know, I've got to walk with respect, and sometimes walking with respect means being honest and offending people. That's part of the process. But you never forget that you're a guest. So I'm a guest in the domain of our special guest for today's podcast,
Júlia Belas Trinidade, aka the Avon Lady.
Hello.
Hello and welcome back to the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. I do like that, Avon Lady. Are you getting used to it now? Because you're based in Bristol.
Yes, I am, and I love that people sometimes, especially when I do the BBC phone in, people send me messages on Twitter like, "Hey, Avon Lady," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's cool."
I think it should be your Twitter handle, but you know, you take your time.
I'm glad it's ringing a few bells.
I like the way you said that. Yes. Ding dong. Although we don't have bells like that, I suppose we do. No, we still do have those, but they're not the the normal bell sound now. It's more like brrr. We haven't got time for the ding dong.
Yeah, it belongs to a slower other world. But for whom is the bell tolling in today's podcast? The theme of today's podcast.
Júlia has chosen Brazil 4, USA 0 from the 27th of September 2007. I didn't know Brazil beat the USA by that much, Júlia. What was that in the World Cup?
World Cup semifinal. It was a great game, and looking at Brazil playing like that, the team is just, it works so well. It's one of the best games that I remember watching Brazil play.
And who was up front for Brazil at the time? Was it Pelé or was it the old Ronaldinho or Ronaldo of old?
It was a great duo called Cristiane and Marta. That was like pure magic.
I see what you mean about not your domain, Tim, but I think times have changed, Júlia. This might have been a match that went under the radar once upon a time. And we're looking
for a British audience. I think it may well have done.
Although the stadium's only half full for this match as well. Don't forget that. So but I get your meaning. It probably would have been a 10th full if it was a match in the UK at the time. Give us the background to this. We've heard of Marta, the best women's footballer ever, possibly.
Yes, I would argue yes. Some people would say CC, but it's in Brazil. The context of this match, of course, Women's World Cup 2007. It's been in the next World Cup. It will have been 20 years since that particular World Cup in China, and women's football at the time was, when you look at the scenario, you would see a lot of a domain by Germany. You would see a lot of the United States had a great generation where new players were up and coming, and they would go on to win other World Cups eventually. But this particular World Cup, this particular year for the Brazilian women's national team was a really good year because they had the Pan American Games and they won the Pan American Games in Brazil.
I
And
was
then
there. I was in the stadium. I
that
don't know if
must
that
have
makes you
been,
jealous.
yes, yes, absolutely. And that those Pan American Games already shifted the way that people looked at women's football, because at first, we knew that Brazil had a good team. Sometimes some games would play on the TV, but still it was still a second class, sport. And in the Pan American Games, people actually were able to watch it and support them and seeing them win, which was amazing. So when we got to the World Cup months later, it was like, okay, we have a chance to win this thing. And I won't give any spoilers, but it was a great World Cup for us.
Yeah,
It's a moment. I see this moment for women's football in Brazil as a moment of triumph and a moment of frustration.
Yes.
You get the two things together. When the states are going into this game, and as Julia said, when the powerhouses are the states, Germany, Scandinavia, and there's a key overlap between the role of the women in society and progress in women's football. Brazil is the outlier; it's the exception, because Brazil are not there based on any planning whatsoever. It is purely the spontaneous generation of this extraordinary generation of talent. Now, Marta is a subject that's very, very close to my wife's heart, because when she comes from a similar background in some ways, the other end of the country. My wife is of northeastern immigrants, but which is so common in Brazil, northeastern immigrants coming down to the big cities of the southeast. And Marta is even more precarious. Her upbringing in the northeast. I think her mother is illiterate to this day, and Marta was the youngest of a big family. But just in order to win the right to play football, even informally, you've got to overcome huge resistance, including from your own family. And in my wife's case, it was especially the father. The father wouldn't let them ride a bike, because girls don't do that. You can't do that. Football, no way. And they're thrashed for these things. They're beaten. And Marta had a similar thing inside her own family with her brothers. Partly, I think that you're not allowed to do it. But also, if you do it, you're not allowed to be better than us and humiliate us. Know your place. The player that Julia mentioned, Sissi, who was Brazil's number 10 before Marta. I remember interviewing her on the way to the Olympics in 2000, and her telling me what she went through. Back to the kitchen. Why aren't you washing up pans and all of that? Again and again and again. So in the case of all of Brazil's rivals, you've got a system in place. You've got some kind of planning for women's football. And Brazil haven't. And they take the field in this game against the US side, which has been unbeaten, I think, for 51 games. And despite all of these disadvantages of not having any system behind them, it's just a spontaneous generation. The football comes from Brazil. It's magnificent. And what Marta does, what Cristiane does, the striker, it is extraordinary what they do in this game. So it's a moment of triumph, but it's also a moment of frustration, because all these years later, and we are talking about this dude, we are talking about more than 16 years later. You look at the Brazil side. Marta is still. Cristiane was dropped by the Swedish coach, Pia Sundhage, but she's now back. Why is this? Why has there been an inability? Because the opportunity was missed. And the opportunity to build on what Marta and the others were doing, because there were some other really good players in this team, that opportunity was thrown away, meaning that Brazil is now where it could have been leading the pack. It's now playing catch up. So it's a moment of, it's a glorious triumph. And I'm sure, Julia, watching this game, watching the goals that Marta scores, it must give you a kind of a bittersweet feeling that this is great, but what came after could have been so much better.
Exactly. And if you look at the way that Marta used to play, the way that the team used to play, and they didn't have a lot of visibility, but because they were winning, they were achieving a lot of stuff. They were one of the best teams in the world at the time. There's no doubt about that. So that could be a really good starting point, a late starting point, but could be a really good starting point for a process that just didn't start. Like after the World Cup, you see again Brazil going to the Olympics the next year and again failing to win and failing to catch up to these powerhouses that had structure, had younger players, that had younger generations coming in and taking over, taking the baton to carry it forward. And for Brazil, it always feels like we are stuck at that moment where we got so close, but it wasn't close enough.
But there's lots to celebrate. I mean, the goals that Marta scores, it's just unbelievable, because there's one, she's cutting in from the left and scoring with her right foot, and the other, she's cutting in from the right and scoring with her left foot. You're watching a complete talent, someone who she's got so much time, she's so much mentally sharper, and it's that thing of the great athletes when they're operating in a different time zone from everyone else, where for everyone else things are happening in a blur. For Marta, oh yeah, right, I think I'll beat this opponent on that side, and then I'll just push through the legs there, and it's almost like it's happening in slow motion, because she's in complete control of her art. So it really is a remarkable, a wonderful performance. And the scoreline here against a team that was more than 51 games unbeaten, 4-0, and it could have been 8 easily. Could have been 8. The dominance of Brazil in this game is so great. I will put it to you, Julia, that winning by this margin was a problem, and I shall give you my theory of why. I think this is in the Brazilian mentality. I think we saw it with the men's team a little bit in the World Cup a year ago. Sometimes one of the worst things can happen is when they get a big win. Like, when did they go out of the men's World Cup? Just after they thrashed South Korea, right? And I wonder if it would have been better for their chances of winning the tournament, because they've still got to play the final against the Germans, if they'd have beaten the United States 2-1 with difficulty, rather than 4-0. There's an expression which is used in Brazil for teams in these circumstances, and I don't think it's it's prejudiced. It might seem prejudiced, but a team playing in high heels.
Yes, and that's exactly it. It's like, I don't think that the Brazilian women's, I think that happens a lot with the men's team. There's always this idea that Brazilians are always great footballers, that Brazil will always have a great team. That's not the case. I'm a terrible footballer. There are plenty of Brazilians who are terrible footballers. But and with the national team specifically, there's this construct that Brazil is always going to be the best. The women's national team came to play England at the Finalissima here in Wembley, and I would interview people arriving at the stadium. I was covering for a Brazilian website, and people would be like, yeah, Brazil 3-0 easily. And I would be like, mate, you're not following women's football at all, because, and people would be like, yeah, Marta is not playing, but still will be great. And I was like, okay, we have this idea that Brazilians will always be the best. And that's really, really difficult, because when we lose, it's way more painful, I think, than when someone's not expecting. And
they've already bought the beer, they've bought the champagne, they've prepared the party,
everything. And it's crazy, because with the Brazilian women's national team, we've always been kind of underdogs. We had this great generation, two really great generations. Like the first and the second are really, really good, and the second we still have some players playing to this day. But then after that, you see many countries investing more in the women's game. Many countries doing a lot to support the players, to give them the best conditions they can. While Brazil reaches this point, and then it's always like, let's advance a little bit, then cut a lot, advance a little bit, then cut a lot. And that happens so much with Brazilian women's football that I was kind of, because we are at the end of the year, so, and I went to Australia for the Women's World Cup, so I've been, nostalgic with women's football, thinking about what happened this year. And I was thinking about this particular time because even for me, I grew up watching men's football. I didn't watch a lot of women's football growing up, but still it was something else. And we could see, when we thought about women's football, we would think Germany, United States, and Brazil. And we were on the top of the world, like, in a sense. And then, after all these shortcomings, then we were not anymore, and other countries were investing more, were doing more, and we kind of lived in the past for so many years.
The decisive moment for me, just because I happened to be there watching it, was in the London Olympics of 2012, because I had arrived with that idea that Brazil were still amongst the best sides in the world, which they had been. They didn't do particularly well in the World Cup of 2011. But, around this time, they get into the final, and they get to the final against Germany in 2007 after thrashing the States. There are other Olympic finals, and they lose. I remember doing radio before, because Brazil played Great Britain at Wembley, which was, I think it was England, really, with one woman from Scotland, I think. And I did radio with Faye White, former England captain, before. And she said, well, I think Great Britain are going to win. Oh, you what? And they did. They won 1-0. They were the better side. And you could see that Marta, even though she's at her peak then, but she doesn't have the advantage that she had against this American side 5 years earlier. She's not running past people with the same ease. Now, that's got nothing to do with the decline of Marta. It's got everything to do with the increase in the physical and the technical levels of the opposition. And never again, and that's more than 11 years ago, I've never again seen Marta able to unbalance as she was in this game against the States in 2007. And obviously now, it's been the end for a few years now, and she's been like more the wise old owl. But even at the time when you might have thought that physically she was at her peak, the sport had caught up with her. So this game against the States, 2007, this just catches her at the moment when she, as well as being a genius, she's got a physical advantage over her opponents. And that really puts her on a different platform. But that moment is lost because Brazil don't invest. I was watching the highlights of this game. 15 minutes highlights clip in Portuguese. And it's really interesting because the old commentator since left us, Luciano Del Valle, it's the point he makes right at the start. All the other teams in the semi-finals, they've got leagues, they've got structures. We haven't. And this was a time, this was the moment where there was a commodity boom. The Brazilian economy was expanding. There was money on the table. There was government money on the table to launch a women's league. And they didn't do it. Because in order to do it, the Brazilian FA would have had to open up their books, be transparent, and they didn't want to let the government have a look at their books. I wonder why. So the government money that was there to fund a women's league didn't happen. It's happened subsequently. Now I think Brazil is subsequently making progress, but it's making progress after it's missed the bus. So hence the fact, I think this moment, 2007, is a moment of triumph, but also of great frustration, because had they invested then, and they had everything to invest then, we could be talking about Brazil as the country, the powerhouse in women's football. Instead, now Brazil is one of the chasing pack.
even if we didn't continue investing, but at that particular time, Brazil was, we have Olympics, women's football in the Olympics since 96. So since 96, I think in every edition of the Olympics, we were reaching at least the semifinals. In World Cups, it was almost the same. Like we were always getting to the knockout rounds. We were always getting close. So looking at, even if they didn't continue to invest, which is kind of the pattern with women's football in Brazil, still we would have something. We would have a title, an Olympic medal, an Olympic title, or a World Cup title. To you know, the men's game has won a World Cup the last time, 20 years ago, and they still think they are one of the best because they won a World Cup, 5 World Cups, the last one over 20 years ago. So. Um, when you look at women's football, it was really short to at least have this idea of, no, at least we had some really, we were the best at some point. I think we were the best at some point, but we couldn't be the best for the period that we needed to be, in order to achieve something, to complete a full cycle with one win or two wins on an Olympic and a World Cup. And that's really sad because, we have Martin Cristiano in the team now. And, they may still go to Paris, I don't know, but it will never be the same. Like in the World Cup, in the Women's World Cup, Marta didn't play for, I think, 2 out of the 3 games that we played. Or um they're not the same. We are not the same. Women's football in the world is not the same, so it's quite hard to imagine us having that chance again anytime soon, which is really sad because Brazil are bidding to host the Women's World Cup in 2027. So um things would need to change really quickly if we wanted to win that one.
Someone quite well informed told me last week that fan violence at the Brazil-Argentina World Cup qualifier is a serious problem for Brazil wanting to stage the Women's World Cup in 2027. We shall see. I felt a bit sorry for the States in this game because everything goes wrong for them, doesn't it? I mean, the first goal is a bizarre own goal from a corner skidding in, and the defender trying to clear it and ends up.
It's a good header.
Yeah,
It's a good header.
yeah.
Ironically.
And when they're 2-0 down, there is one of the most ridiculous sendings off I've ever seen in all of my time watching football. I think probably the standard of refereeing in the women's game is much, much better than it was then, because poor old Shannon Box, she picks up a second yellow card for tripping and falling over, and it's a bizarre. And there's no way I think the States are going to be able to come back in this game. But even so, just with 10 players, the second half is just a procession.
Yeah, and Brazil were the passes. I just look at the passes. Like 2 of the games, it was 4-0. Two of the goals were assists by Formiga, and she doesn't even look up. She just passes the ball, and she knows where Cristiane will be, where Marta will be. So it's amazing to see her playing as well in that level. She's my favorite player. And her history is almost really similar to Marta, but she has been playing for even longer in the national team, and that was a really great performance by her as well. And the assists are just like class football there. I love it.
It's an amazing game. And by the way, Tim, I thought you said this wasn't your domain.
Well, it's Julia's domain.
I know, but you've been speaking for the last half an hour. I was trying to get a word in edgeways.
Yeah. When we get to the music, I'll shut up and
no, you won't. No, you won't. That's your domain and all. Now, a lot, and actually, it was important to have this preamble because I think it focuses our attention now that we know that this was a moment. It wasn't one of many. It was the moment, particularly for this incredible player, of whom I will ask you an important question before we end this conversation. But is it, and just forgive me if I'm really just barking up the wrong tree here, but I wonder when you said, look, and you acknowledge this as well, Julia, when you said that the the Brazil women's team in this semi-final in 2007 got there by their own means or by an accident of their own enthusiasm, or however you want to describe it. It was not through the organization of football in Brazil. I wonder, nevertheless, whereas anywhere else in the world, I can't actually imagine the team getting to the semi-final of a World Cup without the organization around them. Certainly not today. And even then, I wonder whether there isn't something in the makeup or maybe the hype of Brazil for Brazilians themselves that it makes it easier to produce outstanding women's footballers. If, for example, I know it's been 20 years, but let's go back. If, for example, the men's team are doing well in a World Cup, I would assume that it would influence young boys playing football, but also young girls, despite all the social restrictions. You know, I'm assuming that they have an advantage of some sort, just being Brazilian, albeit Brazilian women in an atmosphere where there's no support for them. You know.
Yeah, and when you think Brazil, you think football. Every country that I've ever been in, I tell people I'm Brazilian. First thing they talk about is football. Second thing they talk about is samba, and it's obviously part of the idea of being Brazilian. Even if you don't like football, a lot of Brazilians don't, but people will look at you and will associate that you being Brazilian with football, and then you have to tell them no, it's not the case. But for girls, for women in Brazil, we didn't have a lot of references. Growing up, I grew up in the 90s, early 2000s, and we would see there were some games being broadcast. It was usually on, like, not the main channel. Globo is the main channel in Brazil, a TV channel. The games were usually on Band, which is another broadcaster. It's still like free TV, but it wasn't necessarily the channel that everyone was watching. And especially because Brazilians are so connected with the clubs. You have football once every 4 years with the national team, with the World Cup. Everything else is really not that interesting. But with club football, we are really involved. And club football didn't have women's football back then. Didn't have a lot of women's football back then. You had some examples, you have some teams, of course, but not a league, not something for you to be constantly watching, to be constantly involved in. So for these players, for many of these players, to this day, the women's football players in Brazil, their references are men's football players. So, like, they will say, "Oh, I used to love watching Ronaldinho play. I used to try to be whatever, Messi. I used to try to imitate what they were doing because that's what they see most of the time." And with women's football, even if you want to become a footballer in your field, you have the talent, you want to start like Marta did. She had to travel from her city to Rio de Janeiro to start to play football. At 14 years old, she took a coach and she traveled halfway across the country to make her dream come true. And that's something that still happens a lot. Like, it's not in all of Brazil. Brazil is a huge country. It's not in all of Brazil that women's football is growing. It's getting investment. It's in a particular region, in a particular state, actually. So, young girls still have to travel a lot, still have to leave their homes. And that's something that for boys, it's kind of easier to do because you put a lot of expectations. If they are really good, then they will be able to provide for their families, or they will grow up to be Neymar, whatever, and they will be able to, play in the biggest teams in the world. When in women's football, even if they want to do that, even if they want to achieve that kind of level, it's not the same, and they have responsibilities at the house, sometimes carrying responsibilities, and that's something completely, it changes the proportion of, how many girls can actually dream about becoming footballers one day. And that changes because when you look at men's football in Brazil, you have generations coming up. Like the game against Argentina, they had a 17-year-old entering the pitch already with really high expectations. And in women's football, we bring Cristiane back after a bad World Cup. So it's kind of hard to change generations, to have these new talents really come up and take over, because if they are not on the same level as other countries, and it's hard to tell them, leave everything and bet on this, even if you don't win. Because for Brazilians, like, if you don't win, what's the point?
Because when you look at this game, you'd be hard pressed to think that it was Brazil that didn't have organized leagues. I mean, the USA, once they realize that they're in a real game, they look like terrified, rabbits, because they realize, oh my goodness, these people, they're just breezing through us. And I couldn't think of a single player in that 15-minute highlight that Tim was talking about, a single player on the Brazilian side that didn't look as if they were supposed to be there, in the semi-final of a World Cup. Whereas some of the USA players, the goalkeeper, somewhat suspect.
That was a controversial decision from the coach.
Of course it was.
To put in that goalkeeper in place of Hope Solo. In fact, during the highlight, during the match commentary, the Brazilian commentator goes out of his way to thank the American coach for his choice of goalkeeper.
And it's crazy because this goalkeeper is the same that won the World Cup with them in '99. So this generation of the United States team is kind of a mix between the champions of '99 and the ones that would be the champions in 2015, 2015, 2019. So you have Carly Lloyd entering the pitch. She was really young at the time, and she just retired this year. You have you have some players that are coming up and would become legends of the game, but you also have like Abby Wambach. You also have you also have some players, and even Brianna Scurry, the goalkeeper, who were part of this really big generation of the United States national team, that won in '99. So it's quite interesting to see their choices as well, of players, because it's a mixed generation and they don't kind of know how to mix that up. And that's something that is happening with them at the moment. So it's quite interesting, this parallel.
Yeah, it's always tough, isn't it, to replace generations, to move on. I mean, that's still a question for Brazil, but at least now there's a league structure in place, and it's a good league structure. It's the best league structure in South America, so at least there is some path now. It's easier to make a living from the game. We're speaking on the day later this afternoon in Brazil. Brazil have a friendly against Japan live on the biggest TV channel. Brilliant. It's fantastic. The coverage for the last World Cup, even the call up was live on TV. It's unheard of. And the one thing that I think is brilliance, where Júlia is entirely entitled to disagree, but where I've been really surprised by the speed of change, is that the sexuality of the players just isn't an issue anymore. That really isn't. I remember one of the first articles I ever managed to sell over here in the kind of mid-90s. It was with the actress who at the time was the girlfriend of Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo. And she was playing football, and her whole thing was, look, we can show that women can play football, but it doesn't mean that we're lesbians. As if that's a problem. Now, that mentality still exists. But it's been pushed back. I mean, during the Women's World Cup, on the website of the sport website of TV Global, you can go in and you can give marks for the players. Marks out of 10. and there were lots of like macho men who were getting in there, giving everyone zero, just to, So things don't change overnight, but the amount of progress that there has been, especially with the broad acceptance of the sexuality of the players, this has honestly happened faster than I thought was possible.
Yeah. And in 2001, so not that long ago and not long before, this game we're talking about, 2001, the Federação Paulista, the São Paulo Federation, that is the biggest federation. They do, if you look at how much they invest in women's football and compared to the National Confederation, they do a lot more than the National Federation. And they wanted to bring back the state championship. They wanted to bring back women's football to the state, and they released the regulations for that tournament. And players in the regulations, official regulations of the tournament, players would have to wear short shorts, makeup, long flowy hair in ponytails. They had to be skinny, they had to be under 23 years old, because they thought, not trying to justify for them, it's ridiculous, but they wanted to bring the male audience to watch women's football. And this is always an issue with women's football, not only in Brazil, but a lot in Brazil. It's a really sexist country. It's either, dismissing women's football because it completely challenges the definition of what it is to be a Brazilian woman. They're either lesbians or barren, or they will be, if you get kicked when they banned women's football in Brazil in the 1940s. It was because they would say that if you got hit with a ball in your stomach, then you couldn't have children anymore, and that's like the worst nightmare for a woman, of course. And that hasn't changed in the early 1990s, I think 1980s. Late 1980s, when women's football became legal again in Brazil. Some of the stories that would be really pushed by the media to try to promote the idea of women playing football was to talk about women who were mothers, those players who were married and who were mothers. And there's this one particular, I think she was a goalkeeper, Patricia, and she was in the squad that was preparing for the first Pilots World Cup that was in 1988. I talk a lot about it because I studied and doing a PhD on it. But there's this particular story about how she had a baby, and she would travel with the baby, when she was called up, and she would breastfeed, and it would be like such a huge story. But at the same time, she was cut from the national team because the baby would cry at night, and people would say, "You not come with your baby." So it's kind of this idea that, of course, she's a mother, she's straight, she's married, she's what we want from a woman, but she cannot play football if she is like that. And in this case of the São Paulo Championship in 2001, Cici, who was one of the best football player at the time, she used to shave her head because people would say women footballers have to be pretty. You have to have long hair, and she would be like, no. And she shaved her head, and she still wears her head shaved to this day. And she couldn't play in the state championship. And then she decides to move to the US, and she lives there to this day. But can you imagine, like, I don't want the best player in the world, the best player in the country, to come play my tournament because she's ugly, quote unquote, or because she doesn't have long hair? That's so absurd. But still, to this day, there is this idea that, when people talk about women's football, they talk about the players' bodies, the players, and not in a performance analysis kind of way. It's like, oh, she's pretty, she's not pretty, or look at her hair, look at her whatever legs, whatever. So it's kind of difficult to understand this representation, because it's either like, oh, you're a lesbian, you're not valuable because of that, or you are, you are not pretty enough, or you are too pretty to play, and that's an issue.
I would never dream of even saying that we haven't had those issues, perhaps not so blatantly, uh, but you couldn't get away with anything like that anymore today because the women took control of their own narrative. Do you know, the thing that I've noticed the most has been the change here in Britain has been more sort of organizationally. Like, for example, in the media, it's amazing. It is actually amazing. Before, um, England, thankfully, did so well in winning the Euros. I think that was a key moment, but I think the change started before that. But if you go back 10 years, the football commentating was still dominated by men. There were, one or two women there, for example, one or two. And I probably know both of them, because they worked for my station often enough, BBC Five Live. I'm not saying other stations didn't emerge with women commentators subsequently, certainly. But the thing that I see now is, and this is when you know that, hang on, things have changed, when you see women dominating the anchorship of men's games. So it's a woman anchoring the TV coverage of a man's game. It's certainly at least one, if not two, women pundits every single match. And the vast majority of the pre-match and post-match interviews, not so much on the BBC, which has highlights, but more so somewhere like Sky Television and what's it called, TNT nowadays, that it's not an issue. There's nobody that sort of says, well, hang on a second, where's so-and-so? No, we're sharing the love out now, and people get that. And in terms of how the support for football has gone, my stepson, who for his sins is a gooner, and as every gooner knows, even with their enlarged stadium, you still can't get a ticket for it. And he's like got to the point where, oh God, it's such a hassle. He just goes and sees a women's game. And I was like, when he told me this a couple of weeks ago, I was like, Anthony, what, you go and see the women? What's that like? And he said, well, it's as good as the men's game. In some cases, it's better than the men's game. But I don't have all the hassle and everything, the headache of going to see. But the point I'm making with that is it's not an issue anymore. Whereas almost in my mind, till probably the England team winning the Euros, the Lionesses winning the Euros, probably in my mind, I was still, well, not actually winning the Euros, but even that whole Euros competition was the game changer, really, because it was shown on terrestrial television, quite a lot of it. It came on during the pandemic when there were all sorts of other restrictions in football. And what I remember mostly about it up until then, I'll be honest, probably thought, no, I'm not going to enjoy women's football. It's not going to be on the same. It's not going to have the same intensity. It's not going to have the same quality. All of which is wrong, and but that's the reality of it. A lot of men were like me, I think, but the women's team or the women's game, because it's not just about the England team. We saw Spain in the World Cup and they were scintillating. It's one of the best matches I've seen this year. But the women, when they own the narrative, they're not, the TV companies can't say, oh, we have to appeal to men, because that doesn't make sense anymore. Well, okay, so this was the match. May I ask the killer question I was going to ask both of you? Tim's not going to like this, but you said yourself, Júlia, that all of these women, or many of them certainly, that you've interviewed, say, look, growing up, it was the men's, or the men's stars that they looked at and tried to get something from and absorb the way they played. So the question is, Pele or Marta? Which player do you think has made the biggest impact? No, who's the better player?
That's a tough question. Do you think like better players? Because I didn't see Pele playing. That's the main thing. When you look at football in Brazil, we talk about Pele a lot. We see a lot of his games, like nowadays, but it's such a different game that looking back, it's kind of you understand the brilliance, you understand the impact, and of course, winning 3 World Cups, you cannot, I wouldn't say no to that, but um, for me, growing up, and especially looking at the time they many years that Marta has been playing, she is brilliant at her own game. But these are especially considering the time when Marta was at her prime, and of course the football that Pelé used to play are these are such different games, different styles, different perspectives, different ways that I can watch the game and understand the game nowadays that I couldn't answer that. I think I got out of the question really.
No, you didn't actually. What she essentially said was, "It's got to be Marta," but I can't knock
I can't
Pele.
say I can't say that because otherwise people will say it's just because she's a woman.
No. Okay, Tim. Just because you're a man,
Yeah, I mean, what we can't do in this is use one to attack the other, and they're both absolutely fabulous. They're both, and their impact is extraordinary. But I'm going to go with Pele, not a hope because I'm a man, but because I think he tips the balance at the highest level for longer than Marta. And Marta hasn't really tipped the balance for a long. She's been a very good player, but it's been a long time that we haven't seen from the late Marta what we saw from the late Pele in the 1970 World Cup, for example. So I think Pele was a more influential player on the pitch for longer. And there's the thing of winning the world titles, which doesn't only cement Brazil as the country of football, it cements the World Cup. And the World Cup is really the house, and the World Cup as a TV event is the house that Pele built. So in that sense, it's kind of Marta treading in Pele's footsteps. And probably what clinches it for me is Pele being born 52 years after the end of slavery in Brazil. It's an unbelievable achievement. But I think that the best thing that you could say is that Marta is the female Pele. She is by far the closest thing that the female game has come to Pele. And I think in the long run, her influence will be every bit as big, because we're talking about an age where all of this is televised, all of this is going out, and this is reaching a considerable part of 50% of the global population. So it's an extraordinary contribution from both of them. If I have to choose, I'm going to go for Pele.
I don't have to choose because it's not my domain. But what I would say is, if you watch this match, I'm not sure. You could argue that Pele's played better, but I'm not sure about that. I'm not
Watching
sure.
Against Benfica in the end of '62, it's comparable. I think you can make a comparison.
She takes the game and the team and her team by the horns, and she's amazing. She's amazing, and a good choice of a match to talk about with regards to Marta. So thank you for that, Julia. I don't know what Marta's favorite pop music is. Any idea? You're the one doing the PhD.
She's really good. She loves Brazilian sertanejo, which is kind of like how can I explain? It's kind of like Brazilian country music. She
Fucking
loves
horrible.
it.
It's fucking horrible.
Yeah.
It's fucking unlistenable. Jesus Christ, I hate it.
And she's from the Northeast. She loves forró. She loves a lot of regional music as well. So and she plays the guitar really well. She
Mm,
sings really well.
nice.
Whenever she goes to the national team, she takes the guitar, she plays, she sings, she does everything. She's brilliant.
It's a much more agricultural country than people realize, because so
Yeah.
many people's images from outside are of the urban images of Rio. But this kind of country music is so much bigger than samba. It really is.
You
It's
look at
huge.
Spotify's the Spotify Wrapped, and when they say who was the most played artist every year, in Brazil it's 4 out of the 5 most played songs in Brazil in 2023 were Sertanejo music. And it's something that, you just can't escape. It's something that
I
is
try.
yeah, you can try really hard. And there are different genres, different styles, and I like some better than others. But nowadays, the one that's been growing a lot is agronejo, which is like connected to the agro business a lot. They sing a lot about being farmers, about owning land, about having big trucks. It's really
Politically
weird.
dangerous, this. Politically, this is very,
Really,
very
yes.
dangerous. This is the far right mobilizing. I know there are political things here. The dispute between the country and the city is very, very strong in South America generally. Because Brazil was like a farm, an export industry. But agro business, firstly, it doesn't really feed Brazil. It's an export crop. Secondly, it doesn't employ Brazil because it's very, very technologically advanced. So what agro business wants, and it has a lot of money and a lot of influence, is not necessarily what is good for the Brazilian people. But it's really, really powerful. I mean, agro business was a huge backer of Bolsonaro, huge backer. Because I think by and large, he doesn't care if the salaries are down. He doesn't care. The classical model of capitalism is the producer. He needs the consumer to have some money in order to buy his product. But if your consumer is abroad, who cares what the local market has? So there's this agro business thing and this whole structure of radios that they finance and the music that they finance. This is an extra reason that I find to dislike a genre of music that doesn't touch me at all. So it just reinforces my own artistic prejudices. But politically, I think a lot of this is dangerous.
Yeah, and if you look, I was teaching a history class here at the university to, undergraduate students, and I was teaching about music and the importance of music in the fight against the dictatorship. And it's such a huge parallel with what's going on in Brazil right now, with agrobusiness being the most played music throughout the country, and Bolsonaro having like almost 50% of the votes in the last election, losing but still having so much political importance in the sense of having so many affiliates to this day, even after a pandemic, even after everything that he did to
Donald
the
Trump.
country. Yeah, and you see singers.
If you can imagine a stupid version of Donald Trump.
Yes.
I know that's hard to imagine.
It's
it
hard.
Really, really is.
It doesn't even have like the at least the argument for Trump was, oh, he runs businesses, even though it's failed businesses, but he runs business. He can know how to run a country. Bolsonaro didn't even have that. But these singers, these agro-business singers, these sertanejo singers would be huge supporters of Bolsonaro, would visit him constantly, would throughout his presidency, would be really, really vocal supporters of him. And that's something that completely, it affects football. A lot of the players are really engaged with this kind of music, and therefore they are really engaged with the far right in Brazil. You saw this week Neymar went to visit Bolsonaro, or Bolsonaro visited him.
Even worse is Rivaldo.
Yeah.
And Rivaldo is, it really is worrying.
We can talk for hours about the influence, the relationship between music and football, and
is that the time? So let's talk about the charts on the.
Let's do it quickly. There's not a lot to say. Let's do it quickly.
Yeah. 27th of September 2007. At number one, you'll be pleased to know, Julia, after the conversation about is the girl pretty enough?
The objectification of the female gender, yes.
Well, Sean Kingston at number one with Beautiful Girls. What did you think?
It was a fun song to have. I remember I had it as my ringtone on my phone,
Oh,
but
wow.
it wasn't like they didn't even have ringtones that had voices, I think, or at least not in the phones that
Initially.
I could afford. But it was just like the monotone, like da, 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 and it was really, really loud. That's my main memory. It's a core memory from this song, but it's a good song. I like it.
Yeah.
It's a The video clip was really like American in the 50s, really, really him being like in love with the girl and, you know, good song, good song.
Tim, now you know that it was a ringtone and not least Julia's ringtone. Has it gone up in your estimation?
No, I think it's pleasant, but I
It's
wouldn't
all right.
choose to
Could be
spend 3
worse.
minutes with it.
Yeah, Sean Kingston, interesting though, came out of nowhere. Colleagues of mine at the BBC, one of whom who's passed on now, but they went to New York and they went to some sort of underground club, and this little sort of podgy Jamaican kid comes up and he's like about 15 or 16. They go back home on the plane and he's gone to number one in the UK. That's a true story. He was one of those unexpected successes because it's got something about him. There is something about him. He's got a little bit of Jamaican in there, nevertheless, but at the same time, very, very urban New York at the time. And Beautiful Girls, it's a catchy tune, so I'm not surprised.
It's a chewing gum, as they say over here.
Yes.
Well, yeah, bubble gum, as we say over here. The chewing gum doesn't work. And there's a couple of other sort of stateside rappers, really, because I suppose Sean Kingston, I'd call him like a sing J kind of guy, half DJ, half singer. But 50 Cent, there ain't no doubt about what he's at, and he's at number two. Kanye West, there ain't no doubt what he's about, and he's at number four.
Are these people talented?
Oh, Kanye West.
Kanye West, before he went down the madness route, look, he was
I've never really
poet of his generation.
Yeah.
Really?
50 Cent, I've never seen any talent there. Maybe I'm missing something.
I've interviewed 50 Cent.
NBA.
How was
he remarkably handsome, really handsome dude. You had the production staff, sort of, one of the women in the production staff said to me, my dad said to me yesterday, he wouldn't mind if, I managed to hitch up with 50 Cent. At this point, he's a multi-millionaire, obviously.
I think I've always thought of him as his mission in life is to bore the fuck out of me or die trying.
Well, he's clearly succeeded. He even made a movie about his mission in life, and you're not in it. Anyway, his first tracks, though, they were very catchy. Remember, hip-hop rap had been through a gangster stage. And he comes from the gangster side. He got shot about 7 or 8 times.
Well, I've never seen him as a good rapper. There's no flow.
Oh,
I think it was the connection between him and Timbaland. Timbaland was a really good producer, and especially in the 2000s, after he was a rapper closer to the gangster side, and then he went to the pop side of things, and then it kind of blew up. He kind of blew up at that time, but he wasn't one of my favorite rappers. But he wasn't one of my favorite rappers, but his music was good. Like, he wasn't maybe that great, but the music was good.
I think he was one of the better rappers, and I'll say why. First of all, I think it was more. Sorry to pull rank on you, Julia, but it was his relationship with Eminem that really blew him up. Eminem was successful with Dr. Dre, obviously, and that brought 50 Cent into the kind of firmament of the top level of gangster rap. I think one of the things he learned from Eminem and Dr. Dre, I knew Dr. Dre personally. I'm not naming
MBE.
Yeah.
I know bloody everybody. Such a great line.
That's 24 hours, less than 24 hours it took
Yeah.
you to bring that one up.
Yeah.
I know I'll hear it many more times, and each time I won't have a reply. Anyway, I'm not saying it because I'm an MBE that I mention bloody everybody. The reason why I'm saying it is because I had the experience of Dre. I used to see Dre every day. I used to go into the studio, and what Dre is all about is getting to the top of the charts. So he's looking for the pop thing in rap. Or at that time, 1990, he was looking for the pop thing in rap. So 50 Cent comes up about 10 years later, or no, more than that, actually, from 1990s. Probably 50 Cent blew up probably, not far
It was
off,
late
though.
90s. Late 90s.
Yeah, not far, the late 90s, you're absolutely right. And what 50 Cent's got is a kind of a hook. He's got a gangster lean, as that track would say. So he comes with the gangster,
but he ain't going to be
culture.
thankful for what he's got, is he?
He would be, actually. He would be very thankful. Yeah. No, but they all find God at some point, not directly, but in a roundabout way. And he, like that song, his first big hit was "Go Shorty, It's Your Birthday. I want to party like it's your birthday." I had that as a ringtone, actually. That was my first ever ringtone, and you couldn't, it was like an earworm. And even till today, sometimes if somebody's sorry,
a bubble gum
rather than chewing gum. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I loved what you said earlier on about the high heels. That we call 2 left feet over here. Don't know if you know that.
High
Julia.
heels is this idea of you're prancing. You're
prancing. So it's not 2 left feet.
You're parading. No, it's not 2 left feet. It's all gone to your head. So you're on the catwalk.
You're too good for that.
Yeah, you're too sexy for Milan.
Okay,
as I was a month ago.
So how do they say 2 left feet in Brazil? What's the equivalent?
Wooden leg, Perna de Pão. Wooden leg.
Wooden leg. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take the 2 left feet. Thank you. Anyway, let's move on. So top 10, anything else catch your eye? Rihanna at number 9 with Shut Up and Drive.
The Airport Lounge artist. Baby Shambles.
Yeah.
Delivery.
That's pretty good.
It's got a really kind of Kinks feel, that one, to it, even with a Dave Davis guitar solo, which I enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was very good. In fact, very underrated. As the bloke producing us today, Tommy, reckons, they are one of the most underrated rock and roll bands. I wouldn't go that far, but I would say Pete Doherty as a performer and writer, quite underrated. He's missed the boat now. He's missed the boat. Mm-hmm. Things have moved on. He'll never be the kind of Oasis type of frontman that he could have been, and he certainly.
I think he's built for it. Is he? He's built to be a cult artist.
Yeah, you could argue. Although when he was long and tall, rather than chubby, and
but
porky,
that kind of fame, it's not good for there aren't many people who can survive happily with that level of fame.
Yeah, no, it's true. Girls Aloud at number 12, Sexy No. You're into the No earlier, Tim. You still into it?
No, I'm into Amy, who's in there with because it's her masterpiece, isn't it? This time, the Back to Black thing. She's in there with Tears Dry on Their Own, which is, I think, it's just a fantastic record, just a wonderful record. And you play her against so much of this other stuff, and you think, why is everyone else even bothering?
Yeah, number 26, Julia, does that grab you?
She should have been way up there. I loved her music, and that not only Tears Dry on Their Own, but the whole album. It's so good, and her voice was something else. Like, honestly, listening to that to this day, you're like, you feel everything. You don't just listen to the music; you kind of feel it. So good.
How about Pavarotti though? Nessun Dorma at number 29. I mean,
what was that doing back? What was going on?
It's Women's World Cup, wasn't it?
What was it because of that?
I don't know, but anytime there's any international football, Nessun Dorma just seems to rise from the ashes.
It was the theme tune, Julia, to Italia 90, where England reached the semi-finals. So everyone associates the Pavarotti Nessun Dorma with football and with World Cups.
Yeah, I seriously do think it's because of the Women's World Cup. Otherwise,
Right.
it should never have come back at that point. But you've already said everybody else can pack up and go home. So, Luciano Pavarotti, pack your bags, clear off, and that's about it from us. Julia, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Tim, thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Back to the PhD, Julia, not wasting time with the likes of us.
And this was the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. Make sure you check out the next one.